here we go.
Welcome to the Nine Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome back into the Nine Route Fantasy Football Podcast, everyone. Pat and Rudy here with you for our second episode again of this week, week 14. Should be the last week in most leagues for your regular season and getting into your playoff pushes now moving forward. We got a lot of information to get to you and not a lot of time, so we're going to jump right into these start sits if that's okay with everyone. You ready to jump into our start sits?
Yes, sir. Start sits. Why don't you lead us off, Pat? Who do you got at quarterback?
All right, well, the number one option on the waiver wire is going to be my start of the week. Like I said, when we do these start sits, we try to give you guys that, maybe are on the cusp of at the quarterback position, top 12 or so. I do think Taysom Hill has an opportunity to break into that top 12 this week against the Jets. Like I said, I see the Saints defense sort of holding down the fort and giving the offense a lot of opportunities to score. And I think that Taysom Hill, with his rushing ability and, with Alvin Kamara again being back, I think he's got the opportunity to put a couple of touchdowns on the board, whether with his legs or with his arm. So I really like Taysom Hill as my start of the week this week. What about you?
I'm going to go back to the well. Going back to Big Ben. Big Ben.
You mean back to the clock?
Back to the clock. Well, no, he's again, I know you joked about it, and I do feel like, he hasn't been great, but beginning of the year was really, really kind of rough for him. But overall on the season, his numbers haven't been maybe the greatest, obviously. And again, I think the beginning of the year really kind of beat him up. But lately, he has played pretty well. He did have the stinker against the Bengals. And again, that was a tough matchup. But you're looking at him going up against right now a team that loves to just give up points to quarterbacks. We just saw them lose to Jared Goff, and that's the Minnesota Vikings. Ben Roethlisberger has been a top 10 quarterback the last 2 weeks. And I mean, you're really looking at what he's put out. I mean, he's a top 10 quarterback again this week. Obviously, you got a Monday night matchup still to play with Mac Jones and Josh Allen. So you figure probably one of those guys might leak in, but I wasn't high on Allen. I'm still waiting to see if he turns out to be my sit, so to speak, from last week. Again, Roethlisberger is just kind of getting it on at this point. Pittsburgh still, as always, Pittsburgh still kind of hanging around with the playoff push. They're 6-5-1. That draw could end up helping them up down the road a little bit. They're not far out of the picture. And there's whispers out of Pittsburgh that Roethlisberger feels like that this might be his last hurrah in the city of Pittsburgh, the Steel City. So, to see him wanting to go out, just like we talked about not tanking, the concept of never leave the gym on a miss. I think Ben's going to start to really make a push here at the end of the season just to show that he's got something left, whether or not it's in Pittsburgh or possibly somewhere else. I love him this week against the Minnesota Vikings.
All right, and moving on to sits, I'm going to go with Matt Ryan this week against the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers are the fifth best team against the quarterback, and they've been really tough defense all year long. Not just to the QB position, but they're actually top 12 against every position in fantasy football. They're one of only 3 teams to be top 12 against every fantasy position. And the last time Matt Ryan played the Carolina Panthers back in week 8, he had his lowest yardage total with 146 and threw 2 interceptions and scored under 10 fantasy points. So if history, sort of repeats itself in this instance, I don't see Matt Ryan having a great game. Still no Calvin Ridley, relying on Russell Gage and Kyle Pitts and a little bit of Cordero Patterson out of the backfield. I don't think the Falcons have the offensive firepower to score a lot of points on Carolina. Like you said, with the Atlanta defense, it's very possible this is a low scoring game and neither team scores a lot, but I definitely don't see Atlanta putting a ton of points on the board. So I do not like Matt Ryan this week against the Panthers.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. He's had a tough season. Speaking of tough seasons, I'm going to go to sitting Jimmy Garoppolo this week, going up against Cincinnati Bengals. They are the ninth best defense against the quarterback. And obviously, they kind of got beat up a little bit by Justin Herbert, who's had his ups and downs. Jimmy G is not Justin Herbert, not by any stretch. He's thrown, it's almost identical in his last couple of games, playing against Minnesota, a team that gives up a lot of points to the quarterback position. He only threw for 230, a touchdown and a pick. Then he goes against Seattle, loses that game, throws for almost 300, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. He's been under 20 points the last 4 games. He's only had 2 really big games. He had a big one against the Bears, and then he followed that up with another big one in a loss against Arizona. I just feel like this is going to be too tough of a matchup. You're on the road in Cincinnati. You're coming off a bad loss against Seattle that really kind of pushed you back into the murkier parts of the playoff position. You got Trey Lance breathing down your neck, whether the fan base is there or not. So I think this is too tough for him this week. And again, Cincinnati at home looking to rebound and right their ship defensively. You still don't have Debo. Yeah, Kittle had a nice game, and that was pretty cool to see him finally wake up and shake things up a little bit. Bengals are kind of like a mid-road team against the defense, against the tight end position. So if he's looking to pick them apart that way, might not work out to his favor. I think Jimmy G has a tough week and is definitely not going to be worthy of a start, albeit a spot start in fantasy football this week against Cincinnati.
All right, and moving on to the running back position, I am going to reluctantly have Alexander Mattison as my start of the week. I know that he's on your roster, and I get the pleasure of going up against him this week. But looking over the stats, he is getting a lot of touches. Pittsburgh is the 13th worst team to the running back position. That doesn't sound really that bad. That's more mid-pack. But since week 8, they're actually the 3rd worst team versus the running back position. And with Adam Thielen being out, most likely for this game, I could see the Vikings wanting to sort of run the ball a little bit more, protect their defense. And I think that what better way to keep the ball out of Ben Roethlisberger's hands than to run the ball. Now, obviously, I know if Madison has a good game and the Vikings do effectively control the ball, that does ruin Big Ben's chances of being a start for the week as well. So I think it's interesting that we both have a little bit of I don't want to say a different take, but at least a different idea of how we think this game could possibly go. And I'm actually going to be interested in, I guess, seeing which one of us is, I don't want to say right, but more on point for how this game goes. I can see this being a much lower scoring game, a lot more running of the football for the Vikings and more throwing, honestly, for the Steelers. But we'll see how it goes. But I like Alexander Mattison this week against the Steelers.
That is a very good call, by the way, Pat.
It's a bold call too, because Pittsburgh was really, really good against the run early in the season, and the fact that they're the 3rd worst team since week 8 is what has pushed them down from, being one of like they were top 5 in the beginning of the season against the run, and now they're 13th worst, which is obviously bottom half. So they've really been leaking points to the running back position. So we're gonna see how this goes this week. I'm interested in watching this game on Thursday night.
Yeah. And that short week turnaround, I think, is going to be interesting, too, to see how quickly, Ben can reset at his age. Madison getting out of being, you're never 100%, they always say, when it comes to football and stuff like that. So, I think defensively with Pittsburgh, there's been some injuries, and they have, they've beat up on some teams, definitely, but they have also
gotten beaten up on.
Like, take it and give it, definitely on that kind of level. Just looking back, like you said, since week 8, that was Pittsburgh against the Cleveland Browns, where they didn't beat, they really stopped them on the ground and won that game. And that was great. But since then, they've given up 100 yards. They gave up 229 to the Lions. It's been nonstop 100-yard plus. So that's definitely going to take them out there. So I appreciate the Madison call. On my end, I like a guy, again, who had a pretty solid game Sunday night. Some of that was mop up when it came to the receptions and the prevent defense, but Javonte Williams had his breakout game. Melvin Gordon was out with a hip injury. Javonte Williams was drafted with a pretty strong pedigree out of that North Carolina backfield, and some felt he was the best running back compared to Michael Carter. He's able to break tackles, which is a huge thing. Keep on trucking with his momentum. Again, he was last 4 weeks, he's been a top 25 running back with Melvin Gordon mixed in there. And he just put up almost 32 points in our league of record against the Kansas City Chiefs, going up against the Detroit Lions. Now, I did mention Detroit Lions being a decent play against Denver as a whole. But as you know, a lot of times they make a lot of their plays, defense-wise, which turns out to be yards allowed, points allowed, but a lot of quarterback turnovers, especially making picks and things of that nature, maybe getting a safety. But I do think Williams has a pretty good shot to be, again, a top 10 to top 15. And it might even be, in spite of Melvin Gordon still being in the lineup, I still like Javonte Williams as a solid start this week. I think he's onward and upward from here, and definitely going to be a great fantasy football, PPR, especially running back to come in these years.
Yeah, I agree. He looked really good last night, getting the backfield to himself. For this week, I'm going to sit Nick Chubb versus the Baltimore Ravens. You've been getting really bold with a lot of your calls, and I'm kind of playing. I don't want to say playing the fence. I'm generally giving guys that I think people would potentially sit. And I know that Chubb is I have Chubb in one of my leagues, and I know I'm not sitting him. But I do think that going up against the Baltimore Ravens this week, the Ravens are the 7th best team versus the running back. And if you remember, not so long ago, the Browns and Ravens just played a game 2 weeks ago, and Chubb was held to his lowest yardage total and his lowest fantasy point total of the year. I think that the Ravens sort of blueprint for beating the Browns was, we're going to throw everything we have at stopping the running game and try to make Baker Mayfield beat us. And as you well know, because I know that how much you love Baker Mayfield, that
QB1
that doesn't get done. Like Baker just doesn't, unfortunately, get it done. And as bad as the Ravens pass defense has been this year, I don't see it with the lack of weapons on the outside. I think the Ravens do the same thing. They stack the box, look to stop the run, and see if Baker can beat them. I think if the Browns have a shot at winning this game, it's going to be on the back of Mayfield and their wide receiver and tight end group that's in LA or injured at this point. So I really think the Ravens are going to do the same thing they did to them 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and that'll play into my wide receiver start, as a matter of fact. Moving on to my sit, I think this guy has really made a strong push to come back from being a fantasy disappointment from the beginning of the season, but I think you're going to run into a tough team this week. Antonio Gibson, Washington football team running back, is going up against the Dallas Cowboys this week. That's a monster NFC East matchup. Cowboys and Indians, so to speak, from the Redskins name from back in the day. No slight to anyone there, just bringing that up as a point of reference. Dallas Cowboys are the 4th best defense against running backs. Antonio Gibson has had 2 monster weeks back to back. He put up 25 in our league, almost 26 against Seattle in a win, and then followed that up with another 22 points in a win against the Las Vegas Raiders. Ironically, they won both games. I'm just looking at that. They won both games 17-15. So, that happened. But you say, okay, yeah, well, he's riding that momentum, and he's got, out of his last 4 weeks, put up 21, 25, and 22, 3 out of the last 4. He did have one clunker against the Carolina Panthers. Well, it looks like he feasts on defenses that give up points to the running back position for the most part. The Tampa Bay one may be an outlier, but Carolina, that was a team that doesn't give up a lot. They were 3rd at the time, 3rd best roughly for points. Dallas Cowboys are right there. They only give up about 15 points a game to opposing running backs. They've only given up 1 receiving touchdown all season to the running back position. So if you're beating them, you're trying to beat them on the ground. They're one of the few teams that have not given up 1,000 yards rushing yet to any team, so to speak, on the radar. So I think it's a tough matchup for Gibson. It's a tough division game. This game's probably going to be won through the air. Dallas has a tough front, but they do give up some air yards. They do give up points. Heineke looking for McLaurin and maybe DeAndre Carter a couple plays down the field. Also, I think Antonio Gibson, you're going to have a tough week this week. I wouldn't look to him as being my start of the week by any stretch. You're going to probably maybe look to sit him this week against the Dallas Cowboys.
All right. Well, you said that Chubb tied into your wide receiver start of the week. So I'm assuming that's Jarvis Landry.
Yes,
did
sir.
I guess correctly?
You are correct, sir. Yes.
I'm good.
I think what you're saying, and it's true. It's these two teams. It's so weird to see them go on. You see the bye week and then they come right back out and play again. So the sandwich action happening there is one thing, but I feel like it's almost going to be, like you're thinking, like the continuation of what it was before. Baltimore's going to come out and say, Chubb's not beating us. Cleveland's going to come out and offensively, look to utilize, again, slow the game down, still be their own team. They're not going to give up on the run because Chubb maybe had a tough game the last time around. They're going to make it a point to still try to establish dominance. The one receiver who has been pretty much a constant for Baker Mayfield is Landry. He makes his bones underneath. He's a good hands guy. He's a possession receiver. He's somebody who we've seen in PPR and fantasy football for years has been really solid, both with Miami and when he made the move to Cleveland. Got over some early season injuries and has looked pretty solid since. As far as that position goes, I feel like this is another one where he put up 17 points against Baltimore 2 weeks ago. Obviously, they're going to look to maybe take him out of the game, so to speak. I just see it being another matchup, same way, where it was grinded out, low scoring. You say, okay, well, this time everything's going to change. Nah, I think they're going to go right back. That game 2 weeks ago was anybody could have won that game. Again, 16-10. It's a one score game. It's a one possession game. Baltimore followed that up with a loss to Pittsburgh. Again, tough division game. That AFC North is usually grinded out. You do see one or two games where they blow up. Maybe this is it. If it's high scoring, then that's going to benefit Landry even more. But I think he's going to be a solid play. I think he's definitely going to be a top 15 wide receiver, probably week 14.
Yeah, I could see Donovan Peoples-Jones if he comes back having a decent game to maybe catch.
Yeah, they were looking at him a little bit downfield.
Yeah, they missed him in week 12. He played, but they didn't target him very much, and I think they could target him a lot more in this game if they're going to be getting that stacked box. He's kind of their deep threat guy, so a little bit more play action, over the top stuff that should hopefully loosen the defense up for them to run a little bit more. But I do like the call with Landry. He's obviously Baker's go-to guy. So I am going to start, and we're going to stick in that Pittsburgh-Minnesota game. I am going to start Chase Claypool versus the Vikings. I was looking at obviously Deontay Johnson, but he's an every week start. I think he's going to have a good game, but digging a little bit deeper into the research, Minnesota is the second worst team versus the wide receiver position. We've already sort of established that. But Claypool, after having a really good beginning of this season, sort of fell off for a little while. I think it was right when Ben Roethlisberger got injured, and the offense sort of backed up and slowed down a little bit. But Claypool is 7th in the league in yards per reception among wide receivers with 30 targets or more. And Minnesota gives up the second most deep completions in the league. Last year, Claypool had 9 touchdowns. He's only got 1 this year. And I think that, the Steelers need to try to get him a little bit more involved. He's a very dynamic athlete. And I think that in order for the Steelers to compete in this game, they're going to have to do it with their defense, and they're going to have to do it with their wide receivers, because as bad as Minnesota is defensively, they're really good against the run. And I just think that with a guy like Claypool against a team like Minnesota, who gives up, not only a lot of deep passes, but a lot of deep pass interference calls. I know that doesn't count for fantasy points, but I just see the Steelers taking some shots deep this week against Minnesota. And, if they connect on even one of those, that's a good game for Claypool. So I really like him this week versus the Vikings.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid call based on the matchup. Speaking of matchups, this is a reason I'm fading. I'm not saying you're probably not going to bench him. but I'm fading hard on one Chris Godwin. I know he is coming off of a monster game. It was against Atlanta, so everybody has had a pretty solid season against Atlanta, especially at the wide receiver position, especially having TB12 back there. Looked like they kind of woke that offense up a little bit. They had been kind of lagging for a couple of weeks. I mean, overall, I think he's probably going to be a top 30 wide receiver. But at the same time, again, you're going up against that Buffalo defense, who they have yet to play tonight. But I mean, through 11 games so far this season, tonight they go against New England, who isn't a heavy passing team, but they've only given up roughly about 150 points to the wide receiver position, give or take PPR and certain bonuses. That shakes out to about 13 points per the position. Now, granted, they haven't faced the likes of the Tampa Bay offense per se. It's going to be interesting to see that matchup next week and really see what they do against a high-powered offense. You know, obviously they handled Kansas City earlier this season, but this is another one this year. The defending Super Bowl champs, you have the quarterback, you have the multiple targets to look at with Godwin, Evans, and Gronkowski. Obviously, I think he's really been a big factor too. He comes back in as Tom's go-to guy. He's healthy. He's already taking games over again. Godwin had a great game this past week. I don't see it happening this week. I would temper expectations. And again, I think he's flexible, but I don't think he's a wide receiver 1, and I don't think he's close to being a wide receiver 2 going against the Buffalo Bills this week. I would think, honestly, I think it's going to be single-digit points. They're going to take him away as a big play threat, and it'll be Evans. It'll be Gronkowski. Might be even going with little Lenny Fournette out of the backfield to try to keep that defense honest, where Buffalo doesn't give up a ton of points to that position. Again, they're not that wide open against running backs either, but at least you maybe have a little bit more of a shot on the ground to control the ball as opposed to getting beat up in the secondary.
Yeah, that game has the highest over-under of the week. I'm really interested in seeing if that becomes the sort of offensive shootout that people are expecting it to be, or if it ends up being a little bit more of a defensive matchup. I agree that there's a very good chance that none of these guys could have really good games. Buffalo's defense has been outstanding. Tampa Bay's defense is getting better. And I think that, you know, there's a very good chance that this ends up being, you know, a 17-13 game with both defenses really sort of rising to the occasion that is, you know, playing, you know, another really good team in the league. So this is probably the game I'm most interested in watching this week. And I'm kind of glad that the Eagles don't play this week, because I can focus a little bit more attention on this Buffalo Tampa Bay game.
Going full red zone this week. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not even watching red zone at 4. There's only like 3 teams on. So I might just put that Buffalo Tampa Bay game on and leave it on.
Yeah, definitely matchup of the week, potential Super Bowl implications.
Yeah, for sure. My sit of the week is going to be Brandin Cooks versus the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks are the 10th best team versus the wide receiver position. They give up the second most points to the running back position, but their pass defense has actually been pretty good this year. They're 10th versus the wide receiver, like I said, and 12th versus the quarterbacks in fantasy points allowed. Now, Cooks is still the top target there, but after averaging 8.9 targets per game through the first 9 weeks, he's averaging just under 5 per week since Houston's bye week in week 10. The Texans are spreading the ball around a little bit better, and Cooks is obviously getting a lot of the attention from the defense, since he's really the only guy they have to stop. In the last 3 weeks, he's only averaging 8.5 fantasy points per game, and with Tyrod Taylor getting benched and Davis Mills coming in, and who knows who's going to be the starter there next week. There's too much turmoil going around. And like I said, with Seattle's defense being actually a pretty decent pass defense, I just really don't see a whole lot from Houston this week. And I would not play Brandin Cooks if I had a better option.
You had me in Houston. Yeah, but yeah, Brandin Cooks is the one guy, like you say, it's as long as you stop him, they have nothing really coming out of that.
He's the one guy you would play, but I probably wouldn't play him.
Moving on to tight end starts of the week for me. So we did just talk about a game that is interesting to watch. I'm going to go with Dawson Knox from the Buffalo Bills in that matchup against Tampa Bay. Tampa doesn't mind giving up some points to the tight end position. They're kind of like in the bottom 10 against the position. They give up touchdowns, they give up yardage, they give up receptions. Because again, those linebackers are really heavily involved in pressing the quarterback, not so much in coverage. And then their secondary has been a little suspect throughout the season and done just that. They've given up some points to wide receivers / the tight ends. Dawson Knox has been really a godsend. I think he'd probably be definitely in the top 5 for the season. It's just, he missed a couple games with a broken hand and then came right back and really just didn't miss a beat. And by missing games, just taking a peek, he's still a top 10 quarterback. You're right. Top 10 tight end, even after missing 2 weeks, and he had the luck of the bye week. And then he kind of got right back on the horse. He dropped 14 against Indianapolis. He had 2 touchdowns in receiving against those New Orleans Saints. He's going up against New England tonight, so we'll see how he makes it out of that game against. That's going to be a tough matchup for him. New England's very stingy against the tight end. But again, moving on from that game, in a game that will probably be, at least Vegas is expecting fireworks. Pat, I believe you and I think kind of maybe not quite that heavy. Still maybe, somebody gets to 20, but Dawson Knox against Tampa, I think this week he has top 6 tight end potential, possibly even better, depending on how things go in the game.
And speaking of that Houston game, since I just talked about that with Brandon Cooks, on the other side of the ball, I'm going to start Gerald Everett this week. I know that he had a really bad game with the 2 fumbles this past week. I think a lot of times, especially as professional athletes, you kind of vow to, even though they won the game, you kind of vow to, kind of step up and play better the next time you get a chance to get out there. Since week 10, since Russell Wilson had returned from his finger surgery, he's targeted Gerald Everett just as much as he's targeted Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And Everett actually has more receptions than either of the two. He's actually got 2 14-plus fantasy point games in the last 4. And I think he makes it 3 out of 5 this next week versus the Houston Texans, who are the 10th worst team versus the tight end position. I think Wilson is, with the finger thing, has been struggling to Wilson's always been a really accurate deep ball thrower, but I think he struggled a little bit with his deep ball since the finger injury. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot shorter targets for Lockett and Metcalf and a lot more targets for Gerald Everett, who, makes his hay in the middle of the field on those short and intermediate routes. So I really like Everett this week versus Houston.
Yeah, I think him getting some looks and targets over the past few weeks is, everybody's got DK Metcalf on a milk carton because of, different plays and stuff like that. But yeah, I think Russell's trying to spread the ball around a little bit, and he's still getting back from his hand injury. So I like that call. Who are you sitting this week, Pat, for tight ends? I got to be somebody out there you're not a big fan of.
Well, unfortunately, it's my tight end in our league of record going against you this week, but I really do not like
2 for 2, buddy.
Yeah,
I love it.
Killing myself here.
Just bench everybody. Do me a favor. Do yourself a favor. Thanks.
I might actually bench Hawkinson this week. Honestly, I have Dalton Schultz on my roster as well. And
yeah, against, I kind of liked him this week.
yeah. So, but TJ Hawkinson going against the Denver Broncos. Broncos are the 4th best team versus the tight end position. And this game has the 2nd lowest over-under of the week at 43.5 points. And honestly, I'm thinking about betting the under on this because both teams kind of struggled. Denver has been really bad offensively. Detroit has been decent offensively and maybe decent defensively, but Denver's been really good defensively. I just don't see a whole lot of points in this game. Denver's actually top 10 versus every position in fantasy football. We talked earlier about only a couple teams fitting that bill. Denver's one of those teams. And with DeAndre Swift likely out still this week, I think Denver can really just key on stopping TJ Hawkinson and taking him out of the game. And I think Denver wins this game in a very low scoring matchup. And I don't see a lot of fantasy points from either side.
Yeah. That sounds like a legit thing right there with the matchup. Another popular name at tight end, I kind of go the same route with you, looking at that Patrick Fryermuth versus the Minnesota Vikings. Actually, your boy Hawkinson had a decent little game against a team that is pretty stingy against the tight end position. But overall, through the season, the Minnesota Vikings have been pretty solid against the tight end position. They have given up, and let me just double check that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, fourth least amount of receptions overall, and only 3 touchdowns. They're only giving up about 6 points a game. And some of that actually bubbled based on the matchup that just happened against the Detroit Lions. But again, Fryermuth this week against that team, against the Minnesota Vikings, they're stingy against the tight end. Now, on the opposite end, they are the best against wide receivers. So like you said, that duality is going to play into Ben having probably a solid game. Looking at Claypool, Deontay Johnson, my boy Ray McLeod getting involved, holler. And I think Fryermuth might be a little more distraction, a little more pass protection and run blocking. Obviously, Najee Harris being involved on that team as well. So Fryermuth this week, I think he can find a better option. He's probably going to be outside the top 10 for you this week. Sorry about that.
You don't have to apologize for him. It's his fault. All right. So who are you starting defensively?
And we're going to keep running around the same game. Final call here. I'm going to go with the Seattle Seahawks against the Houston Texans. Again, I think that, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think Seattle is going to come off of this big win against the San Francisco Giants and really kind of
the Giants.
Were
they playing baseball?
I did just say that, didn't I? The San Francisco Giants. That's actually not bad. Because I'm thinking of, I'm already thinking of baseball since of the lockout. Baseball, we hardly knew you. Remember that sport? But no, the San Francisco 49ers. Let's try that again. Yeah, I seeing them come off, that was a huge win, big division game. And again, while they've only got 4 wins on the season, they're only 2 games out of a playoff spot, depending on things. And that's a huge tiebreaker, obviously, against the Niners. So seeing them go against Houston, the Texans, not the Astros, the Texans. They are, again, they're just a bad team. They don't have great players, and their defense just leaks points and gives them up to the defenses. Tyrod Taylor, Davis Mills, no running back, just a Brandon Cooks to keep an eye on. Yeah, all signs point to a big game for Seattle across the board, specifically probably on the defensive side for those Seattle Seahawks against Houston.
Yeah, definitely. And my start of the week is going to be the New Orleans Saints versus the New York Yankees. The Jets, sorry.
Oh, you don't like the Mets? No, nobody likes the Mets. Don't worry.
I don't think of the Mets when I think of New York baseball, sorry.
Neither does most of the city, so you're fine with that.
The Jets are the last absolute worst team versus opposing defenses in fantasy football. They've turned the ball over a league high 25 times, which is probably part of the reason why. And the Saints they're like mid-pack as far as creating turnovers. They have 17 turnovers forced this year. But like you and I had talked about before, even if the Saints don't force any turnovers, which I do think that they're going to do, the Saints are one of those teams that's really opportunistic when they do force turnovers, because of the fact that their offense is struggling. They're one of those teams that really looks to score on defense when they get an opportunity. I'm not predicting a touchdown. I think that's hard to do for a defensive unit, but I do think that the fact that the Jets turn the ball over so often and the fact that the Saints look to be very, one of those teams that really try to turn around and put that turnover on the board immediately, I can see, a potential defensive touchdown from the Saints. They're really good against the run, which is going to force the Jets to throw the ball. And that's where it seems like most of their turnovers come from. They have many more interceptions than they do fumbles as far as their turnovers go. So I really do like the Saints this week, obviously, versus the Jets.
And finally, Pat, who don't you like this week on the defensive side of the football? I'm sure there is a play out there that everybody should avoid that they think might be a good matchup.
Well, one of the top defenses in fantasy football all season has been the Buffalo Bills. And while I do think that they're a defense you should keep on your roster for the remainder of the year for your playoff run, if you're lucky enough to be making one, I don't think that you should start them this week against the Bucs. We talked about what this game could be Vegas is calling for it to be, like I said, the highest over under of the week. So they're calling for points. Now, Vegas isn't always right, obviously, but just the fact that you have two high powered offenses going up against each other does in fact lead to the belief that there could be a ton of points scored in this game. And if there is, obviously that is not a very good thing for either defense. Obviously, giving up yards, giving up points, drops that defensive number down in your fantasy point total. So Tampa Bay also does not turn the ball over very often. They are about middle of the pack with 16 total turnovers on the year. And the Bills do turn the ball over on or get turnovers on defense, but most of their turnovers have been against offenses like the Jets. They get them in bunches. They get, 3 or 4 of them in a game, but they haven't turned over the really good teams that they've faced as often as they have some of these teams that they beat up on. So I don't see them beating up on Tampa Bay, and I don't see Tom Brady really turning the ball over a lot. So I would sit the Buffalo defense this week versus the Bucs.
I think you are correct. I am going to say that a defense that has been pretty solid through most of the season has started to take on some water lately and have become just not a solid option, maybe a little shaky. But again, there's still been a top 20, call it maybe, defense. The Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota, again, they may not win every game, but they put up points. They put up yardage. That's really one of the heavy things. And they're not a gigantic turnover team. These are all factors that play into your defense being solid. We've seen Pittsburgh, beginning of the year, they had a great game against Buffalo. They had a nice game down the road against Seattle, against Cleveland, and again against Baltimore just this week. So, when you look at a team that accumulates sacks the way they do, they had 7 sacks against Baltimore. You might not get to that level against Minnesota, granted. But at the same time, yeah, I think overall, the interceptions are there. They're just a very busy football team. And outside of the shootout that they got into with the Chargers, and they got beat up a little bit, back-to-back losses against Cincinnati. They put up 82 points in 2 games against that defense. But beyond that, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense has been pretty solid. Unfortunately, I think this is one of those games where, again, Minnesota comes on a Thursday night. While they have been low scoring, I think Minnesota does turn this game into a little bit of a shootout. I feel like this is one of those few Thursday nighters that maybe has the potential to be an over and, a 50-pointer plus type of game where these teams just kind of like let it air out just to get the heck out of Dodge. So Pittsburgh against Minnesota, not going to work out for you, unlike it did probably this past week against Baltimore.
Yeah, this is another one of those games that could go either way. It could be a shootout. It could be, neither team, really being able to move the ball. So we'll see how that goes. I do like these Thursday night games because I feel like on the Thursday night games, teams are sort of the most true to their identities as far as you don't have as much time, obviously, to, watch tape and prepare and, look for weaknesses and game plan for the other team's weaknesses and all these things that these coaches do in the NFL nowadays. I feel like these Thursday night games is just like, all right, we got to line up and play our game. You're going to line up and play yours, and we'll see which team is the best. You know what I mean? And I really think this is going to be a good game. A lot of these Thursday night games have been sort of hit or miss. I still watch them because I love football, but I'm actually very interested in this game, even though it's an AFC NFC matchup that doesn't really have any, division implications or anything like that. Both of these teams are still both in their playoff hunt in their respective conferences. And I think both teams really need this win pretty badly in order to keep those playoff hopes alive. So I think it's going to be a really good game.
Yeah. I don't think it'll be, I think it's going to be a good Thursday night game. Definitely.
All right. Well, we ran through some potential options at running back and wide receiver. some streamers at the quarterback, tight end, and defensive positions, and then did our start sits for the week. I feel like another job well done for the 9 route. I think we could top it off with a tie this week between the two of us. And well, now that wouldn't work. You'd still make the playoffs, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That's fine.
I'm sure you are. All right. Well, I guess that's going to do it for this week, folks. Thanks for listening. Rudy, got anything you want to say before we sign off for the night?
Well, yeah, I mean, going in, this is put up or shut up for you and I and the rest of our league mates that are still hanging around. Obviously, we still have people ahead of us that are jockeying for better playoff position and things like that. For a lot of folks out there, this is probably it. Again, a lot of your leagues are playoff bound within a week or two and getting ready for that final push. We wish you all the best of luck. Pat, I even wish you luck. Not a lot of it, just a very small percentage point, there.
Wish you luck in all of your other leagues. Except
yes. Yeah. How about we go that route? But no, again, it's been fun, and we're going to continue to do this throughout the fantasy playoffs, because this is when things really get chippy, and you are starting to look for just any edge. There's no more bye weeks after this, so you're really just going to be going with what you got. Again, injuries, unfortunately, are probably going to play a factor as things go down the road. And then when you get to the very edges of the playoffs and possibly that championship that you're going for, you do have to keep an eye out, because your team may be at a point where some of your players are going to get sat for health reasons, just because maybe teams have clinched and they're slowing things down a little bit. That's when you really got to scramble and hope to God that you have people on your bench that you can plug and play, because if not, it's going to get a little bit out of hand. But we'll be here for you. Again, we'll see what happens come next week. And folks, again, we appreciate you listening. Thank you very much. And we'll see you week 15. Peace.
We'd like to sincerely thank you for listening to the show. You can follow us on Twitter at the 9route1 and at Scott from Delco. We put out a lot of funny and informative information on there. Our email address, if you'd like to email the show, is the 9routeFFB@gmail.com. Make sure to click the little plus wherever you're listening to follow the show. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review. Good luck this week, and we'll be back next week with more fantasy football info to take your team deep here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.